Get ready for Election 92 with the Radio Times.
Radio Times gives you a grandstand seat at Britain's big night with a 16-page election special. There's an hour-by-hour countdown to the BBC's expert coverage, detailed analysis of the key battleground seats, and the chance to catch up with an old friend, the Swingometer.
And if you fancy a break from all that, why not pull out the Radio Times superb film and video guide, the first in a new series of exclusive Radio Times supplements. There are star interviews, previews of forthcoming releases, and a chance to win a movie buff's dream, a week in Hollywood.
Radio Times, Magazine of the Year.
I'm waiting for a gust of wind, or to be more precise, a breeze. Why is that? To see if they actually do flutter and dance, as Wordsworth suggests.
Wait no longer for The Last Romantics over on 2.
The life and works of Dr. Johnson, the history of Leicester, the history of cycling, and surrealist art between the wars are the varied specialist subjects in Mastermind with Magnus Magnusson in 25 minutes. That's after the news and campaign report, now on BBC One at 5 to 10.
Earl Spencer, father of the Princess of Wales, has died. He had a heart attack in hospital. He was 68. Going to the wall, the business failure rate reaches a record high. And with the polls pointing to a hung parliament, Paddy Ashton says the other parties can't go it alone. Good evening. The father of the Princess of Wales, Earl Spencer, died this afternoon at the age of 68. He had a heart attack while he was in a London hospital recovering from pneumonia. His death was unexpected. None of his family were with him when he died. The Prince and Princess of Wales are in Austria on a skiing holiday. They're expected to return home tomorrow. Court correspondent Jenny Bond reports.
On the July day in 1981 that his third daughter, Diana, became the Princess of Wales, Earl Spencer was fated as the quiet hero of the hour. The long walk up the aisle of St Paul's Cathedral was for him a test of strength because of a massive brain hemorrhage 3 years earlier that had left him weak and often unsteady on his feet. He once reflected that all he'd ever wanted for his daughter was for her to marry the man she loved, and she had done that. And he remembered, too, the support she had given him on that day.
It's a long walk and a slow walk. I always find walking slowly more difficult than walking fast. But my daughter was very good to me and helped me up the aisle on her arm, and it made all the difference, really. Having a good, strong daughter to take me up.
His family's links with royalty are thought to date back to the 15th century. He served as equerry for George VI and the young Queen Elizabeth. And the Queen had been the chief guest at his own wedding in 1954 to Frances, daughter of the 4th Baron Fermoy. That marriage ended in divorce in 1969. His second wife, Rain, is the daughter of the romantic novelist Barbara Cartland. Together, Earl Spencer and his new wife refurbished the family mansion, Althorp, in Northamptonshire. They opened it to the public, and in recent years the sale of a number of art objects and paintings from the house was said to have caused strains within the family. It was perhaps the birth of his grandchildren that gave the Earl the greatest pleasure. When Prince Harry was born, he was reported to have shouted the news from the balcony at Althorp.
It'd be lovely for Prince William to have a little companion and a playmate, someone to fight with. I hope one day he'll play cricket for Gloucestershire.
The Earl was admitted to hospital in London last weekend. He was suffering from pneumonia. The Princess of Wales visited him there a few days ago, and the family believed he was recovering.
It transpires that the stroke he had 13 years ago left his heart bruised on both sides, which nobody really knew about. And he's subsequently died from the damage that was done then. Thank you very much.
Can we ask who was with him when he died, sir?
I'm afraid, because we all thought he was fine, my stepmother was at home overseeing something, and I was at home with my family, and I very much regret, and it's a matter of regret for the rest of us, that nobody was with him when he died.
As the new Earl left the hospital with his stepmother tonight, it was announced that the Prince and Princess of Wales will fly home from their skiing holiday tomorrow. But Prince William and Prince Harry will stay on in Austria for a few more days.
160 businesses collapsed every day in Britain in the first 3 months of this year. Figures released today show the number of business failures has risen to an all-time high, 50% up on the same period last year.
Today's report confirms what these auctioneers already knew, that the number of company failures has never been higher. 160 firms are going bust every day. This is where they end up, selling their office equipment under the hammer. The biggest jump in business failures compared to last year is in the southeast, up by 87%, with over 3,500 firms collapsing. In Wales, the increase is 74%, with just over 600 companies going under. In the Midlands, the figure is up by 52%, around 1,600 firms closing. And in Scotland, the least affected region, the figures still show a rise of 28%, with 2,200 businesses going to the wall. Small businesses are the worst hit. Most blame high interest rates, the late payment of bills, and being squeezed by bigger companies in a tight marketplace.
These statistics are a human tragedy, made all the more serious by the fact that businesses haven't done anything wrong. And we're looking for policies that will help businesses out of the recession.
But the increase in closures does not necessarily mean the recession is getting worse, according to the company which compiled today's report.
Even when the economy is on the rise, failures still stay at a high level, and so there won't be any real change in that area for some while to come.
But opposition politicians seized on the figures, saying it was clear evidence of government failure.
These are appalling figures which explode the government's myth that a recovery has started, demand urgent action, and the real divide in this recession election is now between a Prime Minister who will do nothing and a Labour Party that in government will begin to stimulate jobs and investment from day one.
They demonstrate how the government has failed to have any economic strategy whatsoever, particularly towards the small business sector. Small business in the United Kingdom is in crisis.
The government insists, though, that the figures, although sad, fail to tell the complete story.
The number of businesses that have been created during the lifetime of this government is nearly 500,000 more than the businesses that have failed. That's the biggest single increase in businesses in this country for many decades.
Today's report is likely to be the last economic indicator before the election. It adds fuel to an already heated and crucial debate over which party is most competent to handle the economy and lead the country out of recession.
The Labour leader Neil Kinnock has repeated his party's pledge to stop what he called the deterioration in public sector pay awards compared to the private sector. Labour's Shadow Chancellor John Smith said such settlements would be made within clearly defined budget limits. This afternoon, the Environment Secretary Michael Heseltine told a Conservative Party rally that if Labour came to power, Britain would be flat on its back.
Mr Major is 49 today, and staff at Conservative Central Office were helping him celebrate. He even got a card from the journalists covering his campaign, not all of whom have been entirely complimentary about its strength or direction. Today the Prime Minister was keeping quiet and leaving the speeches to his more bruising colleagues. Speaking to a rally in Leicester, Michael Heseltine said with low inflation, low taxes and a low strike rate, all the signs of a recovery were in place.
There always is one great risk. The risk of a socialist government. Overnight, at once, at the speed of light, recovery would be over. The darkness extended. Taxes up. Interest rates up. Mortgage rates up.
Some positive notes were inserted today to satisfy the critics, but the Conservatives believe voters are still worried about Labour's competence to run the economy, and exploiting this to the full is their best hope of winning the election. Labour know this, and so on LWT's Walden, Mr Kinnock was determined to make the point that they've very publicly committed themselves to economic prudence.
A government that believes that it's got the luxury of wandering off and either increasing its expenditure or of raising taxation is likely to do it under pressure. In order to help us resist the pressures that will arise under any government, we've made our position extremely clear, and we're not going to spend more than the country can afford.
Mr Kinnock was pressed about a manifesto commitment to halt the deterioration of the pay of people in the public sector, like hospital workers and teachers, compared to the private sector. He was asked what would happen if there were extremely high pay rises in the private sector. He said it wouldn't happen.
It's not a reality either to say that everybody will be dragged along by these wild horses of private sector wage negotiations. That is putting not only the worst possible construction, but I think probably the least realistic construction on the condition that Britain faces.
At a news conference this afternoon, the Shadow Chancellor was repeatedly asked the same question. But what if there were inflationary demands?
What I've said about the way in which we will seek to settle public sector pay is that we want fair and rational means of determining that. We will seek to discover these and to act upon them. And it will all be done within clearly defined budget limits.
What Mr. Kinnock has said today is that he'd let public sector pay rip, and that whatever happened in the private sector, he'd peg public sector pay settlements to that. That would mean a terrible burden for the taxpayer. It would also unleash inflation, and the people who were allegedly getting their pay put up would soon find it ripped away, either in higher taxes or higher inflation.
Labour's economists say the arguments of the 1970s simply no longer apply. They believe that the discipline of the single market means there'll never again be very high wage settlements. With 2 more economic reports out tomorrow, the arguments over recession and recovery are likely to dominate the debate again. It won't be the details that decides the voters, but who they trust most.
The Liberal Democrat leader Paddy Ashdown has repeated his demand for proportional representation as the price for forming a coalition with either of the main parties in the event of a hung parliament. But the former Liberal leader Sir David Steele today suggested it might be enough for the other party just to leave the question of PR open. Both the Conservatives and Labour have again rejected a deal with the Liberal Democrats.
The Liberal Democrats went into the election determined to speak with one voice, especially on the question they knew everyone would ask: how would they behave in the event of a hung parliament? Paddy Ashdown's line has been consistent. Neither of the other 2 parties should look to him for support unless they're prepared to offer a firm commitment to proportional representation for Westminster. But his predecessor, Sir David Steele, has broken ranks, saying merely that there would have to be a commitment to consider the PR question as open. And even when asked about Mr. Ashdown's famous line, "Don't even pick up the phone unless you're willing to offer PR," he returned to his own much weaker demand.
I think that Paddy has been right to take that line. It's a line that we all agree with, and I think people must know that there is no point in picking up the phone unless they are prepared to put PR at least into their thinking.
One reason for Sir David's approach is likely to be his experience of the Scottish Constitutional Convention, where Labour has agreed to a form of PR for a future Scottish Parliament. The Liberal Democrats' president recognised that had been achieved through negotiation. He appeared to agree that Labour, or even the Conservatives, wouldn't have to concede PR for Westminster immediately.
I think there's no doubt that if the opening atmosphere is that PR is very much on the table, then that is a phone call well worth making, to follow this analogy.
But the ultimate objective of any talks on a programme for a coalition government was clear.
We are reasonable people, and therefore we don't turn down approaches from other parties who want to have constructive discussions, as long as we're clear that what we are looking for in this is a prerequisite for any further discussions about the content of policy is an understanding that the election just fought, the one that will take place on April the 9th, that would be the last British election fought under first past the post.
Paddy Ashdown has been sticking to his own hard line and accusing the media of reading their own nuances into the words of his colleagues.
Neither is there a difference between me and David Steele on this, nor is there a difference between me and any other member of the parliamentary party. We've taken this decision collectively, and we're absolutely clear. What is required is a full commitment to legislate for proportional representation at Westminster before you can have a successful partnership government.
Mr. Ashdown wants to avoid any hint of horse trading, at least until polling day, while leaving himself some room for manoeuvre. But memories of disagreements between David Steele and David Owen during the last election campaign still send shivers down Liberal Democrats' spines. Today's differences of emphasis, some would say differences of strategy, may not be so serious, but they've been an unwelcome distraction as the party tries to capitalise on its improved showing in the polls.
Paddy Ashdown took the Liberal Democrats' campaign to France today. It was, he said, an attempt to draw attention to Europe, an issue which he claimed the other 2 main parties were ignoring because of differences of opinion within their ranks. This afternoon in Boulogne, he addressed an audience of Liberal Democrats from throughout Europe, as Justin Webb reports.
This was the ultimate in television campaigning. The voters were being left behind for the day, in the sure knowledge that they would see these pictures this evening. The Ashdown campaign headed for Boulogne, and the centrepiece of the show, a sort of purpose-built Euro rally, complete with Euro liberals, the whole thing constructed simply to give a setting for Mr. Ashdown's speech, who began in French.
Monsieur Gaulle, Willie, Yves, mes chers amis britanniques, français, Belgique.
Not surprisingly, though, the main part of the speech was delivered in the language of the voters, focusing on European cooperation in the economy, the environment and security.
These issues should be debated in this election. They will dominate the next government and parliament as surely as night follows day. They should be central to this whole election campaign. But the other parties are hiding from Europe in order to hide their own divisions and splits.
It was a simple message, delivered in rather contrived circumstances, even by the standards of this election. But the Liberal Democrats say it was not a stunt, but a serious attempt to draw public attention to their Euro enthusiasm. By mid-afternoon, Mr. Ashdown and his advisers were on their way back to Britain, having made their point.
In Scotland, the Scottish National Party leader Alex Salmond says his party's best shots of the campaign are yet to come. Labour says it's set to win a record number of seats, and the Conservatives are launching an initiative to highlight the damage they say constitutional change would inflict on Scotland.
At one of 3 election strategy meetings today, Labour's Scottish front bench team, encouraged by a commanding poll lead, predicted they would win more than 50 seats north of the border and claimed the nationalist threat was being contained.
If you go into the shopping centres, if you go into the housing schemes, if you go into the communities of Scotland, then more and more people want their vote to count. They want to make sure that when they vote, they achieve change.
But the SNP intend to step up pressure on Labour by questioning its commitment to devolution. They claim Mr. Kinnock's speech in Glasgow showed he wouldn't set up a Scottish Parliament before 1994.
Neil Kinnock, in his visit to Scotland, has virtually undermined their entire devolution strategy. And with Kinnock apparently putting back the timescale for devolution, then there are going to be serious questions asked of the Labour Party this week.
Kinnock's commitment, we've always thought, was a little less than wholehearted to the whole thing. And the fact that he's been up this weekend saying that maybe the timetable is not as tight as it might have been, there's certainly warning signs there.
The proposals for devolution have not been properly thought out. They haven't addressed any of the real problems. And Neil Kinnock is now trying to essentially push back commitment because he knows he can't deliver.
The Tories are convinced that will help them as they prepare to launch a fresh initiative this week, focusing on how they claim constitutional change will damage Scotland and lead to separation from the rest of the UK.
The outlawed loyalist group, the Ulster Volunteer Force, has admitted it murdered a 43-year-old Catholic man at his home in Portadown in Northern Ireland early this morning. Terry McConville was in bed when a masked gunman broke into his house and shot him. The UVF have claimed he was a member of the IRA, but this has been denied by his family and by the security forces. In Cairo, the Arab League and representatives of Colonel Gaddafi have failed to break the deadlock between Libya and the United Nations over the Lockerbie bombing. The UN is preparing to vote on whether to impose sanctions against Libya because of its refusal to hand over for trial 2 men suspected of carrying out the bombing in 1988. The Arab League agreed to write to the United Nations setting out its position.
For a second day, the 2 Libyan envoys, both of them reputedly close to Colonel Gaddafi, were trying to win friends in Cairo. But a meeting with the Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak and his Foreign Minister Amr Moussa yielded no sign of progress. Afterwards, the Libyan Foreign Minister made a speedy exit, saying little to reporters. His Egyptian counterpart emphasized that serious problems remain unresolved. And this afternoon, another sign that this last-ditch effort to defuse the tensions between Libya and the West was foundering. Libyan officials failed to attend a special session of the Arab League. Arab diplomats let it be known that the Libyans had come up with no new proposals. Colonel Gaddafi continues to insist that he will hand the 2 Lockerbie suspects over, but not to courts in either Britain or the United States. Within the Arab League, there's some sympathy for Colonel Gaddafi's claim that he's being bullied by the West, but no desire at all to become embroiled in the dispute on Libya's behalf. Tomorrow, the UN is likely to impose a deadline on Libya. If the 2 Lockerbie suspects aren't handed over by April the 15th, then sanctions will be imposed. Despite Colonel Gaddafi's diplomatic activities, this confrontation between Libya and the West looks set to intensify. Stephen Saka, BBC News, Cairo.
Israel's foreign minister has said he'll resign from the government. David Levy has disagreed with the Prime Minister, Yitzhak Shamir, over his handling of the Middle East peace talks. It means the Likud party is openly split as it approaches the general election in 3 months' time.
Mr. Levy dropped his bombshell to followers who, for some time, have been urging the foreign minister to pull out of Likud altogether. This he has yet to do, but his speech tonight included a sustained barrage of criticism, both against Likud and the government of Yitzhak Shamir. Mr. Levy said Likud was undemocratic and attacked what he called attempts to intimidate those supporting him. Mr. Levy attacked Israel's foreign policy, criticizing those who wished to create problems with the United States, something that has been dominating the headlines in recent weeks. Mr. Levy won't submit his resignation formally to the cabinet until next Sunday. It will then take effect the following Tuesday. There's time for a compromise, but at the moment it's not at all clear if this is possible or not. Paul Adams, BBC, Jerusalem.
The Socialist Party in France has lost a number of seats to the Conservative opposition in local elections. The Prime Minister, Edith Cresson, only just managed to hold on to her council.
The turnout was slightly lower than for regional elections last week, but the result was the same. There was a big swing against the Socialist Party, which lost seats and control of several councils where it had had a majority. The results suggest that many left-wing voters and Green Party supporters who had no candidate of their own to vote for stayed at home. In the past, the Socialists would have expected their support. At least one government minister was beaten, and the Prime Minister, Mrs. Edith Cresson, came within 175 votes of a humiliating defeat in the town of which she is mayor. Opinion polls tonight show that almost 70% of the voters want Mrs. Cresson to be sacked. The favourite to replace her is the President of the European Commission, Mr. Jacques Delors. A government reshuffle seems certain later this week, but it's far from certain that President Mitterrand will dismiss Mrs. Cresson. Her many critics think there is no point in a reshuffle unless she is a casualty of it. Stephen Jessel, BBC News, Paris.
Nottingham Forest have won the ZDS Cup at Wembley, beating Southampton 3-2 after extra time. Forest controlled the first hour of the match and looked to be on their way to an easy victory, as Scott Gemmell and then Kingsley Black put them 2 goals up. But in the second half, Southampton's superiority in the air brought goals from Matthew Letitia, and a few minutes later, the equaliser by Kevin Moore. Then, in extra time, man of the match Gemmell made it 3-2 to gain a rare gesture of approval from manager Brian Clough. The transmitters that broadcast Britain's first national radio service nearly 70 years ago were shut down today. The BBC's Daventry transmitter carried King George V's Christmas message in 1932 and beamed the BBC's radio broadcast to Europe and Asia throughout the Second World War.
Calling the British Empire through the Empire Broadcasting Station at Daventry, England.
The Empire Service, the forerunner of today's World Service, started in 1932, when King George V broadcast his first Christmas message to the British Empire.
Through one of the marvels of modern science, I am enabled this Christmas Day to speak to all my peoples throughout the Empire.
By that time, the Daventry transmitter had been entertaining British listeners for 7 years. The new long-wave transmitter meant that families north and south could gather round their fireside, listening to the music and news of the day. But for most of its life, Daventry was best known for transmitting the BBC's overseas services. In the war, it counteracted the propaganda of Hitler and Mussolini with the now famous war reports from the likes of Richard Dimbleby.
As we drive steadily over Cologne in a dead level straight line, the German flak is winking and flashing.
Over the years, Daventry's early steam radio equipment was updated, but now it's done its time. The BBC's World Service will now be broadcast from more modern transmitters, and today Bush House paid its own tribute.
And in the last seconds of Daventry shortwave station's existence, we'd like to thank all the BBC engineers and those of the Marconi Company who have contributed to 67 years of broadcasting history.
And tonight's main news again. Earl Spencer, father of the Princess of Wales, has died. He was 68. The vote race on BBC One at 11:25 looks at voters' reactions to the campaign. But that's the news tonight. Good night.
Hello, lots of low pressure this week. That means lots of rain. That rain is especially welcome in eastern England. Let me show you what's happening. Now, these fronts are moving eastwards, clearing the east coast of England in the wee small hours of the morning, but grinding to a halt over Northern Ireland and southern and central Scotland. That's the chart for tomorrow, with another frontal system rushing eastwards up the English Channel, bringing more rain to southern districts. Lots of isobars on the chart, so pretty windy in places too. That's the radar sequence over the last hour or so. You can see that rain, some of it quite heavy, moving eastwards across England. Behind it, clearer weather, but clearer weather with plenty of showers and plenty of rain up in Scotland as well. So that's the picture for tonight, with that rain moving eastwards into the North Sea in the next few hours. Further showers in the south and west, clear skies in the middle, perhaps even a few patches of fog there. Outbreaks of rain over Northern Ireland, southern and central Scotland, and wintry showers in the north. There could even be a touch of ice under those clear skies there, and also further north, most of us staying just a few degrees above freezing. And then they were quite bright starting over central eastern parts of England, showers in the south and west, plenty of rain over central Scotland there, and wintry showers again further north. A real mixed bag of weather. Gradually more rain though getting into the south, and temperatures staying in single figures everywhere. And windy in the south and in the north, and the outlook unsettled with plenty of rain to come.
Rush! Go! I was there when we won in '89, and this year we're going back again.
I can still remember when Portsmouth won the Cup in 1939. 53 years is a long time to wait.
I was 6 when Norwich lost the semi-finals. This year it'll be different.
I don't remember much about Sunderland bringing home the Cup in '73, but this time I'll be there.
The FA Cup semi-finals. Liverpool take on Portsmouth, Norwich tackle Sunderland. Live coverage of both matches starts next Sunday at 12:45, only on BBC One.
In half an hour, a change from our scheduled edition of Heart of the Matter, as Joan Bakewell looks at a controversial scheme to issue American school children with condoms without parental consent. Now we join Magnus Magnusson at the King's School, Worcester, for some more rounds of Mastermind.